Hi everyone, this is BritSimon. So the DV2025 entry period ended today. It ended at noon on the eastern coast of the USA. And I had created a video around I think about 8 or 9 days ago, where I speculated that this year was going to be a fairly low entry year, like lower than normal. And I explained my reasoning for that based on the number of visits to the DV program website. I gave some data and I wanted to provide an update on that data. Some people have asked me to make sure I update that. Now, I don't have today's numbers, obviously, because the program just ended today and the statistics actually go day to day. In other words, tomorrow, I would be able to see the number of entries today, but we can already see a picture of what happened this year, and I thought it would be worth updating on that. I also want to show you some information on your chance of selection, because that's another thing. It's like, okay, it's very interesting to know how many people visited the website and so on. But what's the chance of selection? What will happen next? How many, is it a certainty that you've been entered into the lottery and now you're going to get a green card? No, it's not like that. It's a lottery. There's a chance of selection. And I wanted to show you some data about that as well. So stick with me for a few minutes. If you're interested in the program from the point of view of just interest to know how it works, this video will be interesting to you. And if you made an entry in DV 2025 and you want to know how likely you are to be selected for the program in the next stage, then this video will give you an idea about that as well. Okay, so let's get into the detail so we can talk about that. Right, so my premise before had been that in each year we can look at the statistics to see how many entries are happening during the entry period, right? And that's kind of interesting. Let me show you where I was at before. I produced this chart, which I'm just going to zoom in on a couple of areas and to show you, what this is about. Basically, this is showing the dates of an entry period, and I've taken like a 6-week period from the beginning of October to middle of November, and taken the statistics from an analytics site, a government-maintained analytics site, for how many people visited the dvprogram.state.gov webpage, which is where you'll create an entry. Now, not every visit results in an entry, right? This is just a way of sort of trying to understand, was the site busier than last year, less busy than last year, and so on. It's not a precise indicator of how many entries we'll have, but it's a pretty good clue, right? It's not precise. It's just a guesstimate. It's just a bit of fun. So don't get too hung up on these details, but I think it's somewhat interesting to compare year to year. Okay, so I've got 3 sets of data: DV 2023, 24, and 25 entry periods. I've got the daily visitors to the website, which always has some activity because that's the same place you go to check instructions. It's the same place you go to get your ESC page, which is where you would check whether you're a winner or not. And so, this data is it's building every day, but the entry period is quite noticeable in terms of when the entry period starts. So, for example, in DV 2023, looks like an average day was between 70 and 100,000 visitors per day to the site, and then on October 6th, it went up to 1.34 million entries to that site. Well, that's because the entry period opened in DV 2023, which would have been, by the way, in 2021, I believe that would have been. So let me just check that. Yes, 21. So that's 21, right? Then in 2022, there was an entry period for DV 2024, and you can see that the increase in visitors started a day earlier on the 5th of October. That's because the program opened a day earlier in that year. And there were 2.5 million entries on or visitors on that day. And so that was a much larger year than the previous year, right? And the same thing can be said for this year. The program started on 10/4, on October the 4th. And on that day, 1.88 million visitors were at the site, right? So I've taken that data day by day, and you can see the data there, but you can also look at this in a chart format, which makes it a little bit easier. And so I've plotted the three colors here. The blue color here is 2023. The sort of orange color there is 2024, DV 2024. And the gray period is the DV 2025 entries. And I've stopped that at this point, which is when I created the video previously for, to discuss that. And I speculated at that time a couple of things. I said, look, this is looking to me like it's going to be a lower entry year than DV 2024 because there are less visitors to the site than there were in DV 2024 entry period, but not as low as DV 2023, right? So somewhere in between. And then I said, we'll probably see a peak around about here on the last full day of the year. We'll probably see activity sort of grow like this, and we'll see a peak. And the peak will come a day earlier because the program will finish a day earlier than it had done last year. So we'll see a peak about here and then a fall off on the last final day because that's a half day, right? So I've taken that data again, and that's what the data looks like now. My prediction, if you want to call it that, was exactly right. There was an increase in activity, and it got back pretty busy, maybe because I published my video. I don't know. Maybe I have that much power. I don't think so, but anyway, the DV program site got busier, almost to 2024 levels in the last 10 days or so, and you can see the peak. Although it's not to the DV 2024 peak, it's substantially higher than the peak for DV 2023. So this line tomorrow will drop down to something like, something around about there, and that's it. That's the end of the program. So we can now see the activity that happens in terms of visitors at that site, and we can think about that in terms of, how many entries were there. I showed this data before, but I want to show this again now. This is the entries without derivatives in each of the recent years. So DV19 through to DV 2024, right? This data is published by the government when they publish the results. And so I've taken that data and I can show you, for example, that in DV 2021, that was the lowest number of entries that's been in the process for quite some time. DV 2022 was low. And then DV 2023 that I just showed you had 9.5 million entries from that activity that's plotted on the blue line, right? And then DV 2024 had 22 million entries from the activity that's plotted on the orange line, okay? So I'm referring to these lines here. So that total number of entries got us to 9.5 million entries for this line in 23, and in 24, we had 22 million entries, right? So, okay, how many entries were there for each of the years? Let's just have a look at that, and we'll zoom in on that number. Sorry, how many visitors, right? So for the whole entry period, those orange and blue and gray lines, what were the number of entries for the whole period? Now, bearing in mind that I've got one more day to add to this data set for DV 2025, but I know it will be something a little bit less than 2 million entries. So there were 28 million, I keep saying mixing up entries and visitors, I'm sorry. This is about visitors right now, right? So there were 28 million visitors during the DV 2023 entry period that produced 9.5 million entries. There were nearly 48 million visitors that produce 22 million entries. So you can see there's a correlation there, right? And so we'll be at about 39 million visitors, which is roughly between the two, right? And so I would suspect that we're going to see something like 15 million, 16 million entries, maybe, perhaps as high as 17 million. But I'm going to predict around about 15 or 16 million entries from the number of visitors we've seen. So in other words, this is, as I was telling you a few days ago, this is a slightly lower entry year, lower than last year, higher than DV2023, but lower than last year by quite a bit. Okay, substantially less, 48 million compared to probably 39 million or less, 38.5 million or something. Okay, no, 39 million. Okay, so that's the first part of this. That's like, that's interesting. And that's the update to the data that I'd given a few days ago. Now, there is one more thing I wanted to sort of explain to you, which is what's the chance of selection in each year? Like, you just entered the lottery. Let's say you entered DV 2025. How likely are you to get selected? Okay. Now, selection doesn't guarantee you a green card. It merely means that you're able to go to the next stage, right? You still have to apply for the green card. Your number has to become current. The embassy has to interview you. All of those things have to happen. Oh, and of course, you have to meet all the requirements, right? All of those things have to happen in order for you to get the green card. So it's not like selection is absolute certain thing that you're going to get your green card. You need to understand that main principle. But getting selected is a big deal. It's an important first step, right? Okay, so if we look at the chance of selection, I want to talk about the chance of selection and try and explain that to you. And so what I've done is I took that year that had a very low number of entries, and I looked at some data. Let me show you the data that I found that I'm using. I've seen this site many times. There is a government-maintained website where they publish certain statistics on the DV lottery. They publish how many people entered per country, how many entries there were, how many derivatives there are for those entries, right? So let's say you've got a typical family of, mum, dad, and 2 kids, right? The dad enters with the spouse as his derivative, and the 2 kids are derivatives. Okay, so the entry is what we're tracking here when we're talking about entries. So that whole family would be one entry, right? If the spouse entered, that would be a second entry, and the spouse would enter listing the husband as the spouse and then the 2 kids again, right? So this site, these statistics are directly from the government, and they show by country how many entries there were in each of the periods, right? So in Algeria, for example, and we've only got up to 2021, which is also why I used that low entry year. I only have up to 2021, but here's the number of entrants and then the number of derivatives. So in Algeria, 221,000 people entered, and 129,000 were derivatives on those entries, right? Additionally. And so the total number of people that were concerned with those entries is 350,000. That's the combination of the sum of those two numbers there, right? Now, we can therefore look at every country. You can go, I'll make sure this link is in the video description below, so you can go and have a look at this. But we can see that there were 3.1 million entries for Africa. And as we scroll down, we've got the numbers for Asia and for Europe and Oceania and South America, right? And so they're all there. So there's 327,000 for South America for a total of 6,741,000 entries total, with an additional 5 million people as derivatives, but I don't count them at the moment. They're not important at the moment. I'm just focused on the entries here. Okay. So, and where do I get so that's I'll give you the link for this data. The other thing that you might ask is, where do I get the number of entrants? Well, that number comes from the visa bulletin in the place where, and again, this is official data, in the place where they list out the number of selectees per country. This is selected people, and these selectees, by the way, include the derivatives. Okay. So the selectees include the derivatives. The number of entries were 22 million for DV 2024. That's the number that I've taken. That's the official number. Okay. All right. So I've put that DV 2024 number into there, and I've taken the individual per region numbers into this spreadsheet. So there's the 3.1 million entries for Africa, 1.2 million for Asia, EU had 2 million, and so on. There's the 327. Note that Oceania is extremely low, 16,000 entries only. But anyway, the total is 6.739 on that spreadsheet. The data here doesn't quite tie with the other one. I think it's North America that's missing, but that's not such a big deal. For whatever reason, this is not totaling up, but it doesn't matter. The 6.741 million, 6.739, it's the same thing, really. All right, so what I wanted to do was take this DV 2021 data and consider it in terms of the percentages of the overall number of entries. And so what that means is 46% of the 6.7 million entries were from Africa, and 19% were from Asia, 29%, nearly 30% were from EU, and a very small 0.25% from Oceania, and South America is 4.85, right? Okay, so if we applied those numbers, because now we're getting into speculation, right? We don't have the number of entries per region for DV 2024. We only have the main number, the high number, which is 22.185 million, right? So we would have to speculate. So what I'm speculating, I'm saying if the number of entries stays the same per region, as it was in DV 2021, and it might not, but this is just a bit of speculation, and we know the number of entries overall, then how many entries were there in DV 2024? These are the numbers: 10.2 million from Africa, 4.2 million from Asia, and so on, right? Now, again, this is just speculation. I can't be 100% sure of this because we don't have this published data. Not yet. We'll have that data later, probably in a year or so. But in order to understand the data now, I'm having to do some speculation. Okay. Now, you may also have seen my calculations where I've estimated, and again, it's only an estimate, of how many cases or how many cases we have for each of the regions in DV 2024. And so these are my numbers from the spreadsheet. You may have seen this spreadsheet before, which is where I've calculated that. If you've seen one of my videos on that describes how I get to these numbers, you'll understand this. But basically, this is my projection of how many selectees there are per region. Sorry, not selectees. This is cases per region. And that's based on derivative rates and so on. So there's a little bit of math in there. So these numbers could be off, but again, it's just a bit of fun, just trying to sort of explain, what this means, right? So if my numbers are right, if my assumption is right, there's 10.2 million entries that went into DV 2024 and 32,865 of those entries were successful, were selected, right? And that's the math I'm doing there. Well, what's that as a percentage? What's the chance of selection? That's 0.322%, right? And I've calculated that all, and you can see that roughly speaking, for the 3 big regions, the percentage chance of selection is roughly, approximately, 1/3 of 1%, right? Which means your chance of selection is roughly, in DV 2024, was roughly 1 in every 300 entries was selected, okay, for those regions. Sounds amazing, sounds ridiculous. Maybe it doesn't blow your mind when I say it that way. How about if I told you that your chance of selection was one chance in 300 years? Would that sound worse? To me, that's always the way I'd like to explain it, because it gives an indication of how difficult it is to be selected in the DV lottery. And bearing in mind that if my numbers are right, not all of these people are going to get the green card, not even close. There's 140,000 people selected in DV 2024. That's way too many. There shouldn't be this many selectees. And so the chance of actually getting a green card from this is probably less than that. So don't underestimate how privileged people are when they become a winner in this program, and how privileged they are when they can actually go and get and go through to get the green card in the end. Don't bank on this as a plan. It's not a plan. It's not a certainty that you're going to get selected in this program. Not at all. I've been saying for some time, please enter, because you can't. Your chance of selection if you don't enter is 0%, right? So something is better than nothing, which is why I've been pushing this. Pushing people to enter. But don't think it's a certainty, no matter how confident you feel, because many times I've been advising on this for over 10 years, and people will often say to me things like, "Oh, I really feel like I'm a winner. Yeah, I really feel this year it's going to be me. I've entered 7 times already, and so surely the 8th time must be the lucky year for me." And the simple fact is, it's a random selection. The 8th year might be your chance, or it may be not. You may not get a chance for 300 years, right? If you can live that long and keep trying. So that's something I thought was important to show you. Just also going on the DV 2024 data, the chance of selection for Oceania is extremely high, 3.7%. So to put that into perspective, that's what, 1 in 25 for Oceania. Now, why is that? Well, it's because they have such a low number of entries, and the chances of selection are localized within the region. One region does not have the same chance as the next region, right? And so, it's pretty. Oceania has a much higher chance. It's pretty obvious that you're going to get people, for example, from that region where they're selected not just once in a 5-6 year period, but they're selected 2 times, 3 times even. And that happens. I do also see people who are selected multiple times from other regions like Africa. And that's not a ridiculously impossible thing to happen. It's extremely, you're extremely lucky if you can win and be selected more than 1 time, right? South America has had in DV 2024, with my calculations, a 0.25 chance of selection. So the chance of selection is related to how many people enter, and then how many people they select for the region, bearing in mind that all of these numbers are too high. So these are optimistic, if you want to look at it that way. And it's partly skewed because this was a massive entry year, right? So let's talk about DV25 and see what the chances are. I said a few moments ago that I think there's going to be about 15 million entries, okay? So if there's 15 million entries, and if the entries are spread out in the same way as they were in DV 2021, how many entries would there be per region? This is the number. So we would see about 6.9 million entries in Africa, about a third less than than in 24. And obviously, we don't know how many cases they'll select, but I'm hoping they won't select as many as they selected in DV 2024. We'll have to wait and see what they select. But you can see that if you have a better chance, I think, in this year of selection, because there will be a lower number of selectees. We can change this to, let's say, 17 million. Just go to the other end of the scale. That's what it would look like. Okay, that's how many entries there would be. And again, this is all a bit of fun. It's not precise. It's simply, based on the data that we have. What's your chance of selection? Okay. So there you go. I've given you an update on the number of visitors to the site, which gives us a clue, only an indication of how many entries there will be. I've explained to you the percentage chance that you would get selected if you entered DV 2025 based on some assumptions and some math and a bit of fun. But hopefully that's interesting and useful for you. What will happen next? Okay, so the results will be announced in May, and in May the program will open up, and typically they select around about 100,000 people. Could be 110, 120,000. Could be as low as, let's say, 80 or 90,000. If they select a higher number of people, then that single draw is the only time they'll release winners, right? If they select more than 100,000 or so. If they select just a small number of selectees, let's say around about 80 to 90,000, then there would possibly be a second draw in about September or October of next year. And that second draw possibility is why they tell you to keep hold of your confirmation number. Okay, so we'll have to wait and see. We'll only know how many selectees there are in about July of next year, right? So in May, you'll go in and you'll see either the words "you have not been selected" or "you're not selected," or you'll see a letter which says "congratulations, you've been selected for further processing." Obviously, you want to see that letter, but probably only about 50,000 people or so will see that letter, whereas the other 15 million or so will see "you are not selected," right? Much more common to see that. Between now and May, that draw will happen. We don't know the precise date when that draw happens, but I can tell you that it's quite early. It'll be in probably December or January. And between December and January and May, they're doing things to filter out some of the cases that they select based on fraudulent entries, bad photos, and that sort of thing, right? So by the time we get to May, if you were selected, by the way, if you were in the top 100,000 selectees or top 50,000 or whatever, and your photo fails their tests, or you entered multiple times somehow, and they identified you through photo recognition, if they decide to disqualify your case from the draw, you were a high enough number to get selected, but you then got disqualified between, let's say, January and May of next year. You'll never know. You'll never know that. They don't tell you that. They simply say you are not selected. It's the same message as for everyone else of the 15 million entries, right? And so you'll never know why you didn't get selected. It's kind of frustrating. I wish we knew. There was some comment that was left for me on one of my channels the other day where someone pointed out it would be really good fun if they would tell you what your rank number was, where you were selected in the whole 15 million or the whole 7 million of Africa or whatever. It would be fun if they would do that, but they don't, unfortunately. But that would have been fun. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of a clue about what's going to happen next as well. That's just a bit of bonus information. I can see we're coming up on 30 minutes now. I didn't expect this video to be so long, so apologies for that. But hopefully you found something interesting. I don't think you're going to get this information anywhere else, and if you do, it's only because they've copied my information. So we'll see whether that pops up on some other YouTube channels as some of my content does. You know who you are. Some of you are so verified and then pretend to not copy my data and my content, aren't you? Anyway, if you want this sort of information, you want this sort of content, do a couple of things for me. Number one, subscribe and click the bell to make sure you're informed when I publish a new video. If you're a DV2025 selectee, you don't have that much chance of selection, but it could happen. And it's important that you're properly prepared when it does happen. So go ahead and subscribe to my channel if you would. And if you like this video, let me know. Give me a comment or give me a thumbs up. If you dislike this video, give me a thumbs down. Just and give me a comment. Let me know why, so that I can produce better content for you. All right. Okay, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. Thanks, then. Bye-bye.